this is Dana and welcome to my channel, The Orchid Hut. Thank you for joining me on this video of 4 rather unique and unusual orchids that are new to my collection, and I'm really excited to share them with you today. Now, how did I end up with these orchids? Well, if you've been following my channel, you know that I sort of set some goals for my orchid purchasing this year so that I didn't just randomly buy orchids that didn't support how I wanted to build my collection. However, we all know that sometimes you just run across some orchid plants that are unusual, unique, have pretty blooms, maybe something that you want to challenge yourself with growing, and you just can't resist. And that's kind of how I ended up with these 4 orchids. But in my defense, I bought these 4 after the very, very pitiful orchid show 2 weeks ago, when I went with the intent to purchase orchids at the show and simply didn't find anything. So if you remember that video from about 2 weeks ago, I mentioned that since we couldn't purchase anything at the show, we actually drove a bit further to some local nurseries in the Houston area, and that was when I found these 4 that I just couldn't resist. So I'm sort of blaming the sad orchid show for leading me into this purchase. And that's my story, and I'm gonna stick to it. Okay, so let's get started with these 4 because I am so excited with all of these. And if they're not in bloom, and 3 of them are not, I will be putting an insert of what the bloom will look like. All right, so we are going to start with the one in the middle. And I'll bring it a bit closer to the camera. And I'll put the name tag up here. And leave it for a bit so the camera can focus. Wilsonara, Red Stars, Red Rooster. Now, if you look on the internet, there's quite a kerfluffle about the name of this orchid. And if you read some sources, they will tell you that the part of the name Red Rooster has just been shortened now to Rooster, because having red in the name is somehow not at all what the naming convention should have been. So this one is also Wilsonara Red Stars Rooster. And you can tell just by looking at the plant that it's super healthy. It has pseudobulbs, a lot like an oncidium, and we'll get to that a little bit more in just a second. And then it has leaves, a lot like an oncidium or an oncidium type orchid. It's currently growing in sphagnum moss, so I'm having to be a little bit extra careful with the moisture content in the pot. It is an intergeneric hybrid between 3 different orchids: Cochlear, Odontoglossum, and Oncidium. So in fact, it is an Oncidium type orchid. It enjoys intermediate temperatures, so it will be great for growing in the house. Medium light, so it'll be okay in my bay window. And the most special thing I think I'm looking forward to is the fact that it should be fragrant. Now, in addition, it should have really, really bright red blooms with a yellow lip. And so I think between the color of the blooms and the fragrance, this one will be a true showstopper when it blooms. Now, as I inspect the plant a little more closely, you can see right here that it has bloomed before. So it is a blooming sized plant. And the newest growth seems a tiny bit weak right here. You know, it just doesn't look like this was developing quite as vigorously as the previous bulbs. But, you know, We don't exactly know the stress that this one has been under, so I have to give it a chance in my environment, give it a chance to adjust. And you know, at some point when there's new root growth, there might be an opportunity to repot it. So I'm really looking forward to the bloom on this one, as well as the fragrance. Okay, so moving on to orchid number 2. This one is a Cochlear Anthese, and the name is Amazing Andrea, Pretty in Pink. And in the wild, there are 15 different species growing in South America as epiphytes, but they grow at higher elevations in the cloud forest. Now, while this one may tolerate the intermediate temperatures in my house, it is going to have less humidity. So I'm hoping that this orchid will be tolerant of less humidity than what it would get in the wild. You'll notice that its growth pattern is more in a fan shape. It really doesn't have pseudobulbs. And the foliage is this gorgeous yellow-green color, which is completely natural for this orchid. So I think it makes for an interesting addition to an orchid collection. Now, as luck would have it, in the 2 weeks that I've had this orchid, it is developing a bloom right here. And this orchid produces single blooms at a time, and they're typically rather large compared to the size of the plant. They're shaped like a shell, and this one has, I think, mostly ivory in the color, but then it has some pink, and it has some pink striations on the lip. So, you know, I've been already a little bit challenged watering this one. It does not like to go dry at all. And so I've been needing to water it every other day, every second day, just to make certain that it does not dry out. It prefers to be moist at all times. So this orchid may be a challenge to grow, but I'm going to do my best, and wish me luck. Okay, orchid number 3 is a Grammatophyllum, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And this one is called Broga Tiger Kalapana. Now this one is going to be an outdoor grower for me and may soon be repotted. It has a very strong new growth happening right here, and it's putting out some new roots, so this might be a great opportunity to get it into a larger pot outside. Now, there are 13 species of these orchids growing in the wild from Southeast Asia and throughout the Pacific Islands. It prefers bright light, great for outdoors, high water, but it also does like to have a wet-dry cycle. So lots of water, let it get dry, and then lots of water again. It does like higher humidity, great for the outdoors here in Southeast Texas. And you know, this is the first one of these that I have had, and I'm looking forward to seeing it bloom. I've looked on this plant and I don't see any indication that it has bloomed before. So if it does bloom, it will probably be a first-time bloomer. And I think it will make a great specimen plant right outside the doorway of the Orchid Hut. Okay, moving on to orchid number 4. I saved my favorite for last. And of course this one had a bit of an advantage because it is in bloom and I purchased it with the spike already underway. This one is a Zygonesia, and the name of it is Snowbird, and then in parentheses, clone. Now, Zygonesia orchids are intergeneric hybrids between Agonesia and Zygopetalums. So you'll notice that it has somewhat of a smaller pseudobulb, and then sort of bright green leaves. In the back, there's another pseudobulb forming, but the bloom spike actually occurs before the bulb is fully developed. Let me zoom in just for a moment on the blooms so that you can appreciate their pattern and their color. They have green petals and sepals with some purple markings, and then the lip is white with purple with a deeper purple towards the center of the bloom. Absolutely gorgeous. And then on top of that, they're fragrant. The smell to me is almost a spicy kind of powdery smell. It's not a strong scent, but if you get up close to the plant, it is relatively easy to pick up on the scent. They like to grow a lot like intergeneric oncidium type orchids. So I should be able to grow this one in my bay window, slightly farther away from the glass, because they do prefer a bit more shadier low light conditions. They prefer to be watered just as they're getting dry. And hopefully this one will be something that will be successful in my bay window. I certainly would like to have this bloom spike produced again under my care sometime in the future. All right, so one more close-up of these gorgeous, gorgeous blooms. Okay, so I really, really hope you enjoyed this video of my 4 unique and somewhat unusual orchids. If you enjoyed it or learned something new, please give it a thumbs up. The subscribe button is coming up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and talk to you next time.